The water claimed her brother on a humid July night when she was 12, pulling him under the lazy current of Lake Monroe like a secret too heavy for the surface. Brianna had watched from the bank, frozen, her small fists clenched in the red clay mud, screaming his name until her voice cracked like the lightning splitting the pines overhead. That scream echoed in her chest for 16 years, a hollow drumbeat that kept her feet planted on dry land, far from any edge where the world might swallow her whole. Now at 28, she stood at the water's brink again, not by choice, but because Juliette Monroe, the girl who'd been her anchor since kindergarten pigtails and shared secrets under the bleachers, had declared it war. "You're not drowning in that fear forever, Brie," Juliette said, her voice steady as the gospel hymns they both knew by heart, even if Brianna had long ago stopped singing them. Juliette's hand, warm and callous from summers baling hay on her family's sprawling ranch, gripped Brianna's wrist like a lifeline, pulling her toward the dock that creaked under their weight like an old confession. The sun hung low over the lake, painting the ripples in strokes of burnt orange and bruised purple, the kind of Texas sunset that made you believe in something divine, even if it was just the Earth's way of bleeding out the day's heat. Monroe wasn't a town that forgave trespasses easily, its streets lined with shotgun shacks and antebellum ghosts, where the air still carried the faint rot of cotton fields turned fallow, and folks divided themselves by bloodlines thicker than the Sabine River. Brianna's family scraped by on her daddy's mechanic wages and her mama's seamstress fingers, mending the hems of lives that frayed too quick in the humidity. Juliette's kin, though they were the Monroes, old money from oil whispers and cattle barons, their name etched on the library steps and the church steeple, a legacy that demanded daughters marry well and sons inherit straight. Brianna had loved Juliette from the start, not in the way Sunday school warned against, but in the quiet spaces where friendship blurred into something sharper, like the edge of a switchblade hidden in a Bible. It started with scraped knees from racing bikes down Pecan Street, sharing stolen sips of her daddy's bourbon behind the feed store, whispering dreams under the stars that tasted like freedom and fireflies. Juliette, with her wild auburn curls and laugh that could coax rain from a drought sky, was the sun Brianna orbited, straight as the county road to Dallas, or so everyone assumed, including the fiancé her parents had paraded in like a prize steer at the fair. Harlan Whitaker, heir to the Whitaker lumber mills up in Lufkin, with his pressed khakis and easy drawl that hit a temper like summer thunder. But lately Juliette's eyes lingered a beat too long when Brianna brushed past her in the kitchen of the Monroe Ranch house, a sprawling white-columned relic that smelled of magnolias and mothballs. Brianna felt it in the air between them, thick as the fog rolling off the lake at dawn, a current pulling them under, unspoken and inevitable. One lesson, Juliette had promised that morning over coffee black as sin, her fingers drumming the scarred oak table where generations of Monroe women had planned their surrenders. "Just you and me, no crowds, no judgments. Like when we were kids, remember? Before everything got so damn complicated." Complicated. The word hung in Brianna's mind like smoke from a brush fire, curling around the edges of her secrets. She was 28 and still a virgin to the world that mattered. Never kissed a girl in the shadowed corners of honky-tonk bars in Tyler, never dared to name the ache that bloomed low in her belly when Juliette's hand grazed her arm. In Monroe, queers were the punchline to Baptist jokes, the reason for locked doors and averted eyes, the stain on a family name that no amount of church donations could bleach out. Brianna's own coming out had been a whisper to the mirror 2 years back, after a night of too much whiskey and a magazine article that cracked her open like an eggshell. She'd buried it deep, told no one, especially not Juliette, who was set to walk down the aisle in 6 months, her white lace dress already hanging in the attic like a noose. They reached the end of the dock, the wood groaning under their boots, and Brianna's heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. The lake stretched out before them, deceptively still, its surface a mirror reflecting the pines that clawed at the sky. "I can't," she murmured, the words tasting like defeat, her gaze fixed on the dark water that had stolen Tommy from her. He'd been 14, cocky with that grin that mirrored their daddy's, diving off this very dock to impress the older boys. One splash, then silence, his body washing up downstream 3 days later, bloated and blue under the weeping willows. Juliette turned to her, those green eyes fierce with the kind of determination that had gotten them through Mama's cancer scare and Daddy's mill layoff without buckling. "You can and you will. For me." She squeezed Brianna's hand, her thumb tracing a slow circle over the knuckles, a touch that sent sparks skittering up Brianna's arm, warm and forbidden. Brianna nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, because for Juliet, she'd wade into hell itself. They stripped down to swimsuits borrowed from Juliet's younger sister, faded one-pieces that smelled of chlorine and childhood summers neither had fully embraced. Juliet eased into the water first, her movements graceful as a heron taking flight, the ripples fanning out like secrets unfurling. "It's just like floating on your back in the shallows," she called up, her voice cutting through the evening chorus of crickets and bullfrogs. "Trust the water, Bri. Trust me." Brianna perched on the edge, legs dangling, the chill lapping at her calves like tentative fingers. Her breath came shallow, memories crashing in waves. Tommy's laughter echoing off the banks, the splash that ended it all, the preacher's voice at the funeral droning about God's will while her mama sobbed into a lace handkerchief. "What if I sink?" she whispered, more to herself than Juliet. "Then I'll pull you up." Juliet swam closer, her arms slicing the water with quiet power, until she treaded just below, looking up with that half-smile that could disarm a rattlesnake. "Come on, partner. One step." The plunge was colder than sin, shocking the air from Brianna's lungs as she hit the surface, arms flailing in a panic that clawed at her chest. She went under once, twice, the world muffling to a roar of bubbles and heartbeat, but Juliet was there, strong arms wrapping around her waist, hauling her back to the light. "Breathe," Juliet murmured against her ear, their bodies pressed close in the buoyant hold, water sluicing between them like a veil. Brianna gasped, clinging to Juliet's shoulders, the fear ebbing into something else, something electric and alive, as Juliet's breath ghosted warm across her wet skin. They bobbed there in the shallows for what felt like hours, Juliet's hands guiding her through strokes that mimicked the lazy roll of the Brazos, arms forward, kick steady, head up to meet the sky. Laughter bubbled up between them, tentative at first, then full-throated, chasing away the shadows that clung to the banks. "See? You're a natural," Juliet said, her voice husky from the effort, as they collapsed onto the pebbled shore, towels draped like capes over their shoulders. Brianna lay back in the sand, chest heaving, staring up at the first pricks of stars piercing the indigo dome. Gratitude swelled in her, mingled with that deeper pull, the one that made her hyper-aware of Juliet's thigh brushing hers, the damp curl of hair at her temple. "Thank you," she said softly, turning her head to meet those eyes that held the lake's reflection. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Juliet's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, something raw flickering in her gaze like heat lightning on the horizon. She reached out, tucking a strand of Brianna's dark hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering on the curve of her jaw. The air thickened, charged with the scent of wet earth and pine sap, and Brianna's pulse thrummed in her ears, louder than the lapping waves. Then, in a voice barely above the whisper of wind through the reeds, Juliet leaned close, her lips brushing the shell of Brianna's ear. "I'm afraid I'll fall for you, Bri." The words hung there, fragile as spider silk, shattering the fragile peace Brianna had clung to all evening. Her breath caught, the world narrowing to the heat of Juliet's body inches away, the confession that upended everything, the friendship, the secrets, the invisible lines drawn by Monroe's unforgiving code. Brianna's heart cracked open, spilling years of buried longing into the space between them, but fear clamped down hard, a vice of what-ifs and whispers from the grave of her brother's memory. She pulled back, searching Juliet's face for the joke, the retreat, but found only vulnerability mirrored back, eyes wide with the terror of her own truth. "Jules," Brianna started, her voice a rasp, but the words tangled, caught on the hooks of society's expectations, the engagement ring glinting like a warning on Juliet's finger even in the dim light. In that suspended moment as the lake sighed around them, Brianna realized the real drowning had only just begun. Not in the water, but in the depths of a love that Monroe would never allow to surface. The days following that twilight confession blurred into a haze of stolen glances and unspoken storms, the kind that brew slow over the piney woods before unleashing fury on the tin roofs of Monroe. Brianna threw herself into work at the garage, her hands black with grease from coaxing life back into rusted Ford pickups, the acrid bite of oil a welcome distraction from the echo of Juliet's whisper. But it followed her everywhere, the curve of those words wrapping around her ribs like kudzu, choking the air from her lungs whenever Juliet's truck rumbled up the drive, headlights cutting through the dusk like accusations. Juliet played it casual at first, the way Southern women do with scandals too hot to name. Away from the porch swing, a plate of her mama's cornbread left on the hood of Brianna's Chevy with a note scrawled in looping cursive. For strength. Love, Jay. But the notes piled up, tucked into toolbox crevices or slipped under the windshield wiper, each one a breadcrumb leading deeper into the forbidden woods of their shared history. Remember the lightning bugs in the orchard? We caught them in jars, made wishes on their glow. I still do every night. Brianna burned them after reading, ashes scattering on the wind like prayers she couldn't afford to send. Monroe simmered under the weight of its own traditions, the summer heat pressing down like a judgmental hand on bare shoulders. The annual Founders' Day picnic loomed, a ritual of fried chicken and fiddle bands under the oaks of Liberty Square, where the Monroes held court like fated royalty, and the Whitakers toasted alliances that bound fortunes tighter than blood. Juliet's engagement had been the toast of the season, Harlan on one knee at the Christmas cotillion, Diamond catching the chandelier light like a captured star. Brianna had clapped from the back row, her smile a mask forged in the fires of unrequited ache, while inside something vital fractured. Now with Juliet's words loose in the world between them, every encounter felt like walking a tightrope over the Sabine. One misstep, and the fall would drag them both under, reputation shredded on the jagged rocks of gossip. Brianna's mama, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue honed from years of church ladies' circles, had started side-eyeing her daughter's late nights. That Monroe girl's trouble, Brie. Fine family, but they got expectations. You stick to your lane here. Lane. The word grated, a reminder of the invisible fences corralling Monroe's daughters. Marry the boy next door, birth the babies, bury the doubts under layers of lace and piety. Brianna nodded through the lectures, her silence a shield, but at night, alone in her childhood bed with the ceiling fan whirring like a confessor, she replayed the dockside moment. The press of Juliet's body, the tremor in her voice. Was it real, or the heat's delirium speaking? Juliet, straight as the arrow of her family's Bible, who dated the quarterback in high school and sighed over rom-coms with brooding leads. Yet the memory of her fingers on Brianna's jaw lingered, a brand that seared deeper with each passing hour. It was a Thursday, the air thick with the promise of rain, when Juliet cornered her behind the feed store, the same spot where they'd hidden as teens, passing a shared cigarette and plotting escapes to Austin's neon glow. The building's shadow stretched long across the gravel, shielding them from the main drag where old men in overalls swapped tales of glory days. Juliet leaned against the weathered siding, arms crossed over her chest, her sundress fluttering like a flag of surrender in the breeze. We need to talk, Brie. About the lake. Brianna's stomach twisted, tools clanging in her lunch pail as she set it down. There's nothing to say. You were scared the water gets to everyone. Forget it. Lies tasted bitter, but they were the only armor she had. Juliet stepped closer, her scent, jasmine and earth, invading the space, making Brianna's resolve waver like heat haze off asphalt. I wasn't talking about the water. You know that. Her voice dropped, laced with the desperation of a dam cracking. I've been fighting this for months. Harlan's good on paper, steady job, family name, the whole script they wrote for me before I could walk. But when I'm with him, it's like reading lines from someone else's play. With you. God, Brie, it's like coming home. The admission hung heavy, pulling Brianna into its gravity. She wanted to reach out, to trace the worry lines etching Juliet's brow, but the risks loomed larger. The town's whisper network, faster than telegraph wires, her parents' fragile pride already cracked by Tommy's ghost. Juliet's father, Elias Monroe, whose temper had once horsewhipped a field hand for less than a sideways glance. You're engaged, Brianna said. The word a blade, she turned on them both. In 3 months you'll be Mrs. Whitaker, living in that big house on the hill, hosting teas for the der. What happens to us then? Juliet's laugh was brittle, cracking like dry creek bed. Us? Is there an us, Brie? Or am I just fooling myself because the alternative, walking away from everything I've known, terrifies me more than drowning? She uncrossed her arms, hand hovering near Brianna's, not quite touching, the space between them a chasm bridged only by shared breath. Thunder grumbled distant, a warning rumble that mirrored the storm in Brianna's chest. She thought of Tommy then, not the tragedy, but the boy who taught her to skip stones, each bounce a defiance of the water's pull. Maybe this was her chance to skip, to glide over the surface of fear. "Meet me tonight," she heard herself say, the words escaping before reason could cage them. "The old mill by the river. Midnight. No promises, just truth." Juliet's eyes lit with a spark that rivaled the fireflies they chased, and she nodded, sealing it with a brush of fingers that sent shivers racing down Brianna's spine. As she drove home through the gathering dusk, rain spitting on the windshield like hesitant tears, Brianna felt the first stirrings of rebellion, a quiet fire kindling in the hollows where grief had long held court. The mill waited like a sentinel at the river's bend, its sagging timbers cloaked in ivy, the wheel long stilled by floods that reshaped the land without mercy. Brianna arrived early, flashlight beam dancing over graffiti-scarred walls, names and hearts carved by generations of Monroe youth seeking solace from prying eyes. She paced the creaking floorboards, heart a war drum, replaying Juliet's confession until it blurred into her own buried truths. When Juliet slipped through the door, rain slicked and breathless, the air shifted, charged with the scent of wet pine and possibility. No words at first, just the closing of distance, Juliet's hands framing Brianna's face, thumbs brushing cheeks flushed with the night's chill. Their lips met tentative, a question posed in the dark, then deepening as answers flowed unbidden. It was salt and sweetness, hesitation yielding to hunger, the kiss tasting of lake water and lost summers, of all the what-ifs they'd denied for too long. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed, the world outside fading to the river's murmur. "This changes everything," Juliet whispered, her voice a thread in the tapestry of their unraveling. Brianna nodded, tracing the line of Juliet's collarbone through the damp fabric, committing it to memory. Or nothing. Depends on what we fight for. In that stolen hour, wrapped in each other's arms amid the mill's echoes, Brianna glimpsed a horizon beyond Monroe's fences. A life where love wasn't a sin to confess, but a current to ride. But dawn would bring Harlan's calls, Elias's summons, the picnic's judgmental gaze. The storm was coming, and this time there'd be no dry shore to claim. The kiss lingered like a bruise on Brianna's soul, tender and insistent, coloring every mundane moment with its hidden pulse. Mornings at the garage blurred into a rhythm of torque wrenches and oil changes, but her mind wandered to the mill's shadows, to the way Juliet's breath had hitched against her neck, a symphony of surrender. She caught herself smiling at nothing, then schooling her face when old Mr. Hargrove shuffled in for his weekly tune-up, his roomy eyes missing nothing. "You look lighter, girl," he'd grunt, wiping his brow with a rag that smelled of diesel and decades. "Love do that, or just the rain washing sins away?" Brianna's laugh came forced, a deflection wrapped in grease-stained banter, but the question burrowed deep. Love. Was that the name for this wildfire threatening to consume the dry tinder of her guarded heart? In Monroe, love was scripted. Heteronormative pageants of rings and registries, not this clandestine blaze that scorched the edges of propriety. Yet with Juliet, it felt as natural as the river carving its path through limestone, unyielding and eternal. Juliet navigated her own minefield, the Monroe Ranch a gilded cage of polished silver and pressed linens, where her mother's voice trilled like a mockingbird over tea trays. "Harlan called again, darling. Such a gentleman, bringing those lilies from his greenhouse. You'll adore the wedding florals." Juliet nodded through the rituals, her engagement ring a cold weight on her finger, but her thoughts strayed to Brianna's calloused hands, the quiet strength that had anchored her when Harlan's affections felt like obligations. They stole moments where they could, a brush of hands in the aisles of the Piggly Wiggly, eyes locking over produce bins laden with heirloom tomatoes, a midnight drive down backroads, radio crooning Patsy Cline ballads that mirrored their ache. Each encounter deepened the bond, weaving threads of intimacy that tugged against the fabric of their lives. Juliet confessed her doubts over lukewarm coffee at the diner on the edge of town. The vinyl booths cracked like old friendships. Daddy's always said the Monroe's Mary Whitaker blood to keep the land whole. It's not just tradition, it's survival. But what if surviving means dying inside? Brianna listened, her fork tracing patterns in congealed eggs, the weight of Juliet's vulnerability a mirror to her own. My mama says the same about staying put. Root where you're planted, Bree, or the storms'll uproot you. But roots can strangle as much as they hold. She reached across the table, fingers intertwining under the Formica shield. A silent vow amid the clatter of plates and locals' murmurs. The Founders' Day picnic arrived like a thunderclap. The square transformed into a tableau of checkered blankets and mason jar sweet tea, fiddles sawing anthems to a bygone Confederacy. Brianna manned the lemonade stand for the Lions Club, her apron starched and her smile practiced, but her eyes tracked Juliet across the green, poised beside Harlan in his seersucker suit, her auburn hair pinned like a crown, laughter tinkling for the crowd. It was a performance flawless and fracturing, and Brianna's chest tightened with each forced curtsy, each toast to futures forged in alliance. Harlan cornered her near the oak groves as the sun dipped, his breath sour with bourbon, eyes narrowed in that way that bespoke old money's entitlement. Heard you've been thick as thieves with my girl lately. Just remember, Bree. Some lines ain't meant to be crossed. Juliet's got a role to play, and it don't include playin' house with the help. The slur landed like a slap, class and implication coiled tight, reminding Brianna of her place. The mechanic's daughter, queer shadows unspoken, unworthy of the Monroe legacy. She held her ground, chin lifted against the bile rising. Juliet's her own woman, Harlan. Maybe it's time you remembered that. He chuckled, low and mean, clapping her shoulder hard enough to bruise before sauntering back to the fray. The confrontation lingered like smoke, fueling the fire when Juliet slipped away at dusk, finding Brianna by the lake's edge, away from the bonfire's glow. He said something, didn't he? Juliet's voice was edged with fury, her hands balling into fists as Brianna recounted the exchange. Rain began to patter, soft at first, then insistent, driving them under the pavilion where punch bowls sat abandoned. It's not just him, Brianna admitted, rain streaking her face like tears. It's all of it, the town, the families, the way they look at us like we're cracks in their perfect facade. She cupped Juliet's cheek, thumb wiping a droplet from her lash. But I can't pretend anymore. Not with you. Juliet leaned into the touch, eyes closing against the storm. Then don't. Come with me to Dallas next weekend. Harlan's out of town. Mama thinks I'm at a bridal shower. We could breathe. Just us. The invitation was a lifeline and Brianna grasped it, their lips meeting again in the pavilion's dim shelter, rain hammering the tin roof like applause. It was deeper this time, hands exploring with the urgency of borrowed time, fingers tangling in hair, bodies pressing close until the world narrowed to heat and heartbeat. Juliet's whispers were fevered confessions, mapping desires long suppressed, and Brianna responded in kind, shedding layers of fear like sodden clothes. Dallas shimmered on the horizon, a city of glass towers and anonymous streets, where Monroe's echoes couldn't reach. They drove up on Friday, Juliet's truck eating miles under a sky bruised with clouds, hands clasped over the gearshift like a pact. The motel on the outskirts was nondescript, its neon sign flickering vacancy like a wink from fate. Inside the room with its threadbare quilt and hum of the AC, they finally let go, bodies entwining in a dance of rediscovery, tender and fierce, the bed creaking under the weight of truths laid bare. For 2 days they wandered the city's veins, hand in hand through deep Elm's murals, sharing tacos from street vendors whose smiles held no judgment, lingering in a bookstore's LGBTQ section, fingers tracing spines of stories that echoed their own. Juliet bought a worn copy of The Price of Salt, pressing it into Brianna's hands with a kiss. For the road back. Remind us we're not alone. But reality intruded on the drive home. Radio news crackling about a scandal in Austin. 2 women prominent, exposed in a tabloid tryst. Juliet's grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. That could be us. One slip and Monroe devours its own. Brianna squeezed her thigh, steadying. Then we don't slip. We choose. Back in town, the air felt thicker, laced with suspicion. Elias Monroe summoned Juliet for a family talk that left her pale and withdrawn, her text curt. Daddy knows something. Be careful. Brianna's mama, too, grew watchful, her sewing needle stabbing fabric with pointed silence. The pressure built like floodwaters, cresting at the engagement dinner hosted at the ranch, a lavish affair of crystal and crawfish étouffée, toasts to Harlan's virtues flowing like the vintage Cabernet. Brianna wasn't invited, of course, relegated to outsider status, but Juliet insisted she cater through a side gig, slipping her into the kitchen like a secret ingredient. Amid the clink of silver and laughter from the parlor, their eyes met across the pass-through, a current sparking amid the steam. It was there, in the pantry's dim confines, that the storm broke. Juliet pulled her in during a lull, door clicking shut, bodies colliding in a frenzy of need and desperation. "I can't do this," she gasped against Brianna's mouth, hands fumbling with apron strings. "The ring, the vows, it's all ash without you." Brianna held her close, heart pounding with the echo of footsteps in the hall. "Then end it. Choose us." But choice came at a cost, and as Harlan's voice boomed a toast to eternal unions, Juliet slipped the ring from her finger, pocketing it like a grenade. The act was small, seismic, the first fracture in Monroe's unyielding stone. Little did they know, eyes watched from the shadows, Elias's groundskeeper loyal to bloodlines, his phone already dialing the man of the house with whispers that would unleash the flood. The ring's absence burned like a phantom limb, a void Juliet hid with gloves and averted gazes, but the whispers spread through Monroe faster than kudzu on a split-rail fence. By midweek, the diner buzzed with sidelong glances, church ladies clucking over pie slices about poor Harlan's jitters, and that mechanic girl sniffing around like she owns the deed. Brianna felt the weight in every transaction, customers lingering too long at the garage counter, their small talk laced with barbs disguised as concern. Heard Juliet's actin' peculiar. Engagements can do that. Stir up old friendships till they sour. She kept her head down, torquing bolts with extra force, the metallic tang grounding her against the rising tide of dread. Nights brought no solace. Sleep evaded her, replaced by visions of Juliet's tear-streaked face in the pantry, the taste of her desperation still fresh on Brianna's tongue. Love, she'd thought, would be a quiet rebellion, a private current beneath the town's placid surface. But Monroe demanded spectacles, turning intimacies into indictments. Juliet bore the brunt in the ranch's echoing halls, where Elias Monroe's temper cracked like thunder over the dinner table. "What's this I hear about you dodging Harlan? Girl, you've got obligations thicker than the blood in your veins. We don't unravel threads our granddaddies wove." His voice boomed from the head of the oak table, fist thudding beside the crystal decanter, while her mother wrung napkin edges, eyes pleading for compliance. Juliet stared at her plate, étouffée congealing untouched, the weight of legacy pressing her into silence. She escaped to the stables after, saddling her mare under a moon that silvered the pastures, riding hard until lungs burned and thoughts scattered like startled quail. Brianna found her there at dawn, curled in the hayloft with a lantern's glow casting long shadows on her face. "He knows," Juliet said without preamble, voice muffled against drawn knees. "Not everything, but enough. The groundskeeper saw us at the mill, told Daddy we were indiscreet. Now Harlan's calling off the wedding, threatening lawsuits over breach of promise. Mama's hysterical, saying I'll ruin us all." Brianna sank beside her, arm encircling shoulders that trembled with the aftershocks. The loft smelled of leather and earth, a sanctuary fraying at the edges. "Let him. You're not property to auction, Jules. This town's poison, class lines drawn in blood, gender roles scripted like bad plays. But we can rewrite it. Leave with me. Austin's got jobs, communities that don't stone you for loving wrong." Juliet lifted her head, eyes red-rimmed but fierce, the fire Brianna had first glimpsed in kindergarten scuffles rekindled. "And what about you? Your folks, they've lost enough with Tommy. Mama disowned me, cut off every cent. I'd be starting from nothing, just like you always have." "Nothing's what we make it," Brianna countered, hand cupping Juliet's nape, drawing her close until breaths mingled. "I've scraped by on grit and grease. You'd thrive, your laugh, your fight. Together we'd be unbreakable." The kiss that followed was a seal on the pact, slow and affirming, hands mapping familiar territories with renewed purpose. They whispered plans into the hay-scented dark. Packing light, a dawn departure in Brianna's truck, heading west to the hill country where vineyards rolled like promises under open skies. But betrayal slithered in unannounced, coiled in the form of Harlan himself. He ambushed Juliet that afternoon at the post office, cornering her amid the brass P.O. boxes, his face twisted in a mask of wounded pride. Slumming it with the town dyke, huh? Daddy warned me you Monroes had loose morals, but this? I'll drag your name through every court from here to Houston. Breach alienation. You'll pay for making a fool of me. Juliet's spine straightened, the venom sliding off like rain on waxed paper. You never loved me, Harlan. You loved the merger, the land grab. Go ahead, Sue. I'll testify to every cold bed and forced smile. Let Monroe see what their golden boy really is. He recoiled, sputtering threats that dissolved into bluster as she walked out, head high, the bell tinkling like a victory chime. But the encounter left scars, Harlan's words echoing the town's undercurrent of hate, a reminder that freedom's price was etched in isolation. Brianna learned of it over a hurried lunch at the lakeside picnic table, Juliet's retelling laced with defiant humor that masked the fear. He called me names I'd blush to repeat, said I'd burn in hell for recruiting you. She stabbed at her sandwich, mustard blooming like blood. As if love's a cult. But Brie, what if he's right? What if leaving means losing everything we are? Doubt crept in then, a chill wind off the water, stirring memories of Tommy's funeral, the preacher's fire and brimstone eulogy, Mama's grip bruising her arm as if to anchor her to the straight and narrow. Brianna pushed it back, leaning across the table to claim Juliet's hand. We're more than Monroe made us. Remember the doc? You pulled me up. Now we pull each other. Their resolve hardened in the face of opposition, small acts of defiance blooming. A joint application to a Austin co-op for women-owned auto shops, where Brianna's skills could shine. Juliet enrolling in online courses for graphic design, dreaming of freelancing from a shotgun house with a porch swing. They met in hidden groves, making love under canopies of live oak, bodies a testament to resilience, each touch a rebuttal to the world's cruelty. Yet the noose tightened. Elias cut Juliet's allowance. Her bank card declined at the gas station with a beep that echoed like judgment. Mama took to her bed, fainting spells and smelling salts, her letters pleading. Come home, child. This phase will pass like summer fever. Harlan's lawyer sent cease and desist missives, veiled threats of defamation suits if Juliet dared speak ill. The breaking point came on a sweltering Saturday, the town alive with the rodeo parade. Cowboys and chaps thundering down Main, confetti raining like false celebrations. Brianna was wrenched deep in a carburetor when Juliet burst into the garage, face ashen, clutching a crumpled envelope. Daddy's selling the ranch. To Harlan's family, dirt cheap, to settle the scandal. He says it's for my own good. Force me back in line. Rage ignited in Brianna's veins, hotter than the engine block under her hands. She wiped them on her rag, pulling Juliet into a fierce embrace amid the oil drums. Then we go now. Tonight. Let them have their dust and delusions. Juliet nodded, tears carving tracks through dust on her cheeks, but in her eyes burned a clarity forged in fire. The awakening to a truth deeper than bloodlines. That honor wasn't in submission, but in the courage to claim one's skin. As the sun bled into the horizon, they packed in silence. Duffels stuffed with essentials, Juliet's sketchbooks and Brianna's toolkit, the truck's beta arc for their exodus. Monroe watched unaware, its lights winking like indifferent stars, but in the cab, hands clasped over the console, they drove into the night, the lake's whisper fading behind. Freedom tasted of dust and diesel, but for the first time it felt like home. The road to Austin unspooled like a ribbon torn from Monroe's hem, blacktop humming under tires that carried them toward an uncertain dawn. Brianna drove first, windows cracked to let the night air scour away the town's cling. Juliet dozing against her shoulder, auburn curls tickling her neck. Billboards for megachurches and truck stops blurred past, harbingers of a world remade. But Brianna's grip on the wheel tightened at every rearview glance, half expecting Harlan's taillights or Elias's Cadillac roaring in pursuit. They crossed into Travis County as the sky paled, the first light gilding the scrub oaks that flanked the highway. Austin sprawled ahead, its skyline a jagged promise of reinvention. Music festivals bleeding into tech startups, where rainbow flags fluttered from porches without shame. Juliet stirred, blinking at the changing landscape, her hand finding Brianna's thigh in a gesture of quiet anchor. "Feels like waking from a fever dream," she murmured, voice thick with exhaustion and wonder. No turning back now. The co-op apartment they found was a third-floor walk-up in East Austin. Walls thin as promises and rent split from Juliet's emergency stash. It smelled of fresh paint and takeout Thai, a blank canvas begging for their marks, Brianna's toolbox on the scarred coffee table, Juliet's easel by the fire escape overlooking graffiti murals of fierce women warriors. They collapsed into the futon that first night, bodies entwined in exhausted relief, the city's distant thrum a lullaby to their hard-won peace. Days blurred into a rhythm of adaptation, raw and revelatory. Brianna landed shifts at a women-run garage specializing in electric conversions, her hands rediscovering joy in the hum of hybrids, colleagues swapping stories of exes and oil changes without the undercurrent of judgment. "You're a natural with these beasts," her boss, a tattooed Latina named Rosa, said one afternoon, handing her a wrench with a grin. "Stick around, we need more fire like yours." Juliet dove into her designs, freelancing logos for queer-owned cafes and nonprofits, her laptop screen alive with colors that echoed the lake sunsets, deep indigos and fiery golds. But the calls from Monroe pierced the bubble. Mama's voicemails, voice cracking with pleas and recriminations. Elias's silence, a void louder than shouts, the ranch's deed signed over in a transaction that severed Juliet like a limb. Harlan's parting shot came via text, a venomous missive. "Enjoy your gutter romance. Monroe forgets trash." The barbs stung, reopening wounds, but in the co-op's community nights, potlucks where stories of coming out circled like shared wine, Juliet found balm. An older couple, both artists weathered by decades of activism, took her under wing, their home a gallery of protest posters and wedding photos from the days when such unions were dreams. "We lost families, jobs, everything," the one with silver braids said, squeezing Juliet's hand. "But look at us now. Love's the revolution that outlasts empires." Brianna watched Juliet bloom in those spaces, her laughter freer, sketches evolving from tentative lines to bold declarations. A series of portraits titled Drowned Secrets. Women emerging from waters that symbolized both loss and rebirth. One night, over rooftop beers with the collective, Juliet unveiled the first. Brianna rendered in charcoal and watercolor, standing dockside, eyes alight with defiance, the lake a swirl of blues that whispered of Tommy's ghost transmuted into strength. "It's you," Juliet said later, back in their bed, fingers tracing the drying paint on canvas propped against the wall. "The woman who taught me to swim through fear." Brianna pulled her close, lips brushing temple. "And you, the one who made me believe in deeper waters." Intimacy deepened in Austin's permissive glow, no longer stolen but savored, lazy Sundays tangled in sheets, exploring bodies with the leisure of lovers unhurried. Walks along Lady Bird Lake, hands swinging openly, drawing smiles from joggers and nods from elders who'd paved these paths. Yet shadows lingered. Nightmares of Monroe's floods where Elias's face morphed into Harlan's, dragging them under. Panic attacks that gripped Juliet at odd hours, her breath hitching like the mare's in the stable. The climax erupted on a crisp October eve, when a package arrived, unmarked, postmarked from Lufkin. Inside, Juliet's childhood locket, snapped open to reveal a faded photo of her with Harlan's arm possessive around her shoulders, and a letter from Elias, ink black as his judgment. "You've shamed us beyond repair. The ranch is gone. Your room stripped. Come home repentant or stay dead to blood." Accompanying it, a clipping from the Monroe Gazette. Local heiress flees engagement in scandalous affair, with a blurry photo of them at the mill, grainy but unmistakable. Juliet crumpled it, sobs racking her frame as she slid to the floor, the city's lights mocking through the blinds. Brianna knelt, gathering her, but the betrayal cut deep, not just Elias's disownment, but the calculated cruelty, the erasure of a daughter for daring autonomy. "He sold me out," she choked. "For the land, the name. I'm nothing to him. You're everything to me," Brianna vowed, rocking her through the night, but dawn brought resolve forged in the forge of pain. They burned the letter in the sink, flames licking the edges as if devouring Monroe's chains, ashes swirling down the drain like exorcised spirits. The awakening came gradual, then in a rush. Juliet channeling the hurt into art, her portraits gaining an edge that drew gallery interest. Brianna advocating at the garage for queer apprenticeships, her voice steady in union meetings. Betrayal's sting transmuted to fuel, propelling them toward a benefit show downtown. A queer artist showcase where Juliet's series debuted to murmurs of awe, buyers snapping up pieces that captured the ache of forbidden waters. On stage, under spotlights that warmed like Texas sun, Juliet dedicated the collection to the woman who taught me to dive, her gaze finding Brianna in the crowd, a beacon amid the throng. The applause thundered, a chorus of solidarity, and in that moment the fractures mended, not seamlessly but with gold veins of kintsugi stronger for the breaks. Back home, as rain pattered the fire escape, they made love with a reverence born of survival. Slow caresses mapping scars, whispers of futures unscripted. "We fell," Juliet murmured, head on Brianna's chest, heartbeat a steady oar. "But we learned to swim." Brianna smiled into the dark, fingers threading curls. "And the water holds us now." Monroe's echo faded to a distant rumble, replaced by Austin's pulse. A symphony of lives reclaimed, where love wasn't a whisper afraid of falling, but a dive embraced. Winter settled over Austin like a soft quilt, muting the city's edges with rare frost that etched patterns on their apartment windows, fragile filigrees mirroring the delicate piece they'd stitched from tatters. Brianna woke to Juliet's sketches scattered across the kitchen table, coffee steaming beside half-eaten beignet from the bakery down the block. A ritual of mornings unhurried, where sunlight slanted through blinds to gild skin still warm from sleep. The garage thrived, her promotions coming with raises that eased the pinch, and she'd started a side hustle teaching auto repair to at-risk youth, her lessons laced with tales of perseverance drawn from Monroe's red clay. Juliet's art took flight, her Drowned Secrets series touring small galleries from San Antonio to Marfa, critics praising the raw humanism in her exploration of Southern queer exile. Sales funded a proper studio space in a converted warehouse, walls alive with canvases depicting not just loss, but reclamation. Women wading rivers with heads held high, lovers linking arms against storm clouds that parted to reveal rainbows. Yet success carried its own ghosts. Interviews probed her inspiration, forcing rehearsed deflections about personal reckonings, the truth too raw for print. Monroe intruded sporadically like thorns in a healed foot. A letter from Juliet's mother postmarked weeks late, its script wavering with unspoken apology. "Your father misses his girl but pride's a hard master. Come for Christmas?" Neutral ground. Juliet read it aloud one evening, voice steady but eyes distant, then folded it away with the others, a collection of half-bridges she wasn't ready to cross. Harlan's shadow loomed longest, his pettiness manifesting in legal barbs. A countersuit for emotional distress, dismissed by their pro bono lawyer as sour grapes from a spurned ego. The victory was Pyrrhic, stirring old fears, but Brianna countered with action. Filing for a protective order, then channeling the anger into a blog for the co-op's newsletter. Anonymous essays on classist homophobia in rural America. "We don't just survive these betrayals," she wrote. "We testify to their hollowness, building altars from the rubble." Spring unfurled in dogwoods and live music, the city's festivals a balm to winter's isolation. They volunteered at a pride center, Brianna wrenching bikes for the community fleet, Juliet leading workshops on visual storytelling for queer youth. Kids with eyes wide as the lakes, hungry for mirrors in which to see themselves whole. One girl, a lanky teen named Riley with a buzz cut and braces, latched onto Juliet, her drawings fierce scribbles of family fractures. "My dad's like your town," she confided one afternoon, crayons clutched tight. "Says loving girls is a phase. But you're proof it's not." Juliet hugged her, throat tight, the cycle broken in that embrace. "It's a choice, Riley. Not the easy one but the true. And truth set you free." The human spark ignited fully at the center's annual gala. A fundraiser in a loft strung with fairy lights and tables groaning under tamales and tres leches. Brianna, in a borrowed button-down that hugged her frame just so, stood awkward amid the glitter. But Juliet pulled her onto the dance floor as a fiddle band swung into a two-step hybrid with queer flair. They moved together, bodies syncing like they'd practiced in Monroe's hidden groves, laughter bubbling as feet tangled and recovered. Mid-spin, Juliet paused, hand on Brianna's waist, the room's hum fading to their shared breath. "Marry me," she said, Not a question but a declaration. Pulled from a pocket a simple band of hammered silver, etched with waves that evoked the lake's gentle lap. Not for papers or picnics, but because I want the world to know you're my horizon. Tears pricked Brianna's eyes, the proposal a crescendo to their symphony of struggles. The hook of that first plunge, the whispers of fear, the dives into deeper affections. Yes, she breathed, slipping the ring on, its cool weight a counter to Monroe's phantom chains. The crowd hooped as they kissed, a seal on vows forged in fire, the music swelling like a benediction. Word rippled back to Monroe as ripples do, stirring a final tempest. Elias arrived unannounced on a humid June morning, his Cadillac dust-streaked from the drive, parked outside the apartment like a relic from another era. Juliet met him on the stoop, Brianna hovering in the doorway, a silent sentinel. He looked diminished, jowls sagging under eyes hollowed by months of solitude, the ranch's sale leaving him in a Lufkin condo that echoed with absence. "I've been a fool," he rumbled, hat clutched in gnarled hands, voice gravel from disuse. "Pride blinded me, thought blood meant control, not love. Your mama. She's gone, Jules." Heart gave out in April, whispering your name to the end. The confession cracked him, shoulders hunching as sobs shook the man who'd once loomed like oak. Juliet's face crumpled, grief a wave crashing anew, and she stepped forward, arms enveloping him in a hug that bridged chasms. Brianna watched, heart aching with the complexity. Forgiveness, not absolution, but a step toward mending. Elias turned to her then, gaze appraising then softening. "You pulled her through waters I couldn't. Reckon that's more kin than I ever was." The reconciliation was tentative, threads rewoven with caution. Weekly calls, a visit to scatter Mama's ashes by the lake, where Tommy's spirit lingered in the willows. Elias thawed, even mailing a check for Juliet's studio. No strings, just amends, and attending their small wedding via Zoom, his nod gruff but genuine. Harlan faded to footnote, his bluster collapsing under scrutiny, the town absorbing the scandal into its folklore as a cautionary tale of love's quiet insurgency. Monroe endured, stratified and stubborn, but Brianna and Juliet had carved their escape, a testament that societal edicts bent under the weight of authentic hearts. Years later, on a dock rebuilt by community hands, stronger, wider, they stood with Riley and her partner, teaching a new generation to swim. The water gleamed under a benevolent sun, ripples carrying whispers of old fears transmuted to grace. Brianna glanced at Juliet, silver threading her curls now, eyes still that verdant promise. "We fell," she said, echoing their origin. Juliet smiled, hand in hers, and learned to fly. In the end, the story wasn't of drowning or defiance alone, but of emergence, the human capacity to navigate currents of convention, emerging not unbroken, but beautifully scarred, to love without apology in a world remade by such courage. Monroe's lessons lingered, a faint undertow, but the horizon called, vast and inviting, where freedom was no longer a whisper, but a song sung loud.